Now, this week we have Peter McMahon from The Scotsman and the journalist and author Kirsty Scott. Good afternoon. Thanks both very much for coming in. Now, a big debate this week, which we're good time to focus on just now, has been on the online trolling story after Susan Calman was heavily criticised online. The front page of Scotland Sunday today, academic calls police after online abuse. This is Dr. Gavin Bowd, who wrote an article about nationalism and fascism in Scotland Sunday. Peter, you've been quite active in the Twitter sphere on this story this week, haven't you?
Yes, I have, and I think this is a very worrying development. I think if we're going to have a debate in Scotland, which we are having, about independence, the constitutional future, it has to be conducted in a way that allows people to express strong views, but where people are not vilified for having those views, people on either side. I think that was a point that was made earlier in the week, quite rightly, by Fiona Hislop, the Culture Minister. And actually, if you mentioned Scotland on Sunday, in a column today, Andrew Wilson, a former SNP MSP, praises the Labour's Douglas Alexander, although chides him slightly for some of the points he makes, and calls for exactly the same thing. I think we have to have that, and we have to have this civilised debate, and we can't have this kind of trolling on any side.
Kirsty, yes, it is. I mean, both sides have been keen to point out this week that both sides are victims of this kind of behaviour.
I know they are, but I don't think it's unfair to say that most of it seems to be coming from the nationalist side. And I know Nicola Sturgeon came out this week and said that she'd had death threats as well. So it is happening on both sides, but I think Peter's absolutely right. It's actually getting to quite a worrying level. It's always been there, but it really has built. And I think possibly that's a result of, it's been a pretty bad couple of weeks for the Yes campaign. In terms of currency, in terms of foreign affairs, in terms of pensions, there's been a lot of issues that they've been on the back foot about. And you tend to see then, I'm on Twitter as well, you know, when people are just factually reporting, they end up having this horrendous abuse targeted at them. Journalists, you know, from the BBC and other places as well, they're just doing their jobs. And I think a couple of the papers today, there are leader columns saying, really, line in the sand, this has to stop now, it's not helping anybody. And you can only imagine that you know, the SNP are particularly worried about this and this kind of fringe that's not doing them any favours at all.
Peter, do you see this kind of behaviour actually stopping? It seems fairly unlikely.
I'd like to think it will. I fear it won't. I mean, that's the problem. What we have to try and focus, you know, you'd hope perhaps that when senior figures in the SNP and in the Labour Party speak out about this, then those on the fringes who support them might take heed of it. I fear that that will not be the case, but what we have to do, as Kirsty says, we have to focus on doing our job as journalists, which is presenting the stories as they come along. Some will not the SNP, and we should be analysing the SNP's policies. Some will not the Labour Party, so we should be analysing their policies. But we have to try and make sure that it's a proper debate. It doesn't mean to say that people can't have views, can't have very, very strongly held views, but they must be able to express those views without these kind of people intimidating them and stopping them, academics or politicians, holding those views.
We've always prided ourselves on being a tolerant nation. I mean, where has that gone? And I think, you know, for all that I said earlier, it's important to point out that some people within the SNP themselves are getting similar abuse when they're seen as not being nationalist enough.
Yeah, that's true. Andrew Wilson today is getting some stick online as a nationalist for being complimentary to Labour's Douglas Alexander, you know.
OK, now let's move on to another issue. It's the UKIP we're discussing, and Nigel Farage is in the Sunday Herald today with a clown's red nose.